2 years ago, the population of Ryman's Charles Upham village in Christchurch increased by tens of thousands of residents in just one day. But they weren't the active retirees that Ryman's welcoming network of villages usually attracts. They were tiny fuzzy, buzzy bees, introduced to the village by chef-turned-gardener and resident beekeeper Marko Meingassner. Marko says retirement villages are the perfect locations for beehives because they usually have beautiful flower gardens, which provide pollen for the bees to make into honey. I believe a beehive completes the look of a great garden, he says. It's always nice to watch the bees on the flowers, having their fill and doing their thing. Marko has been fascinated by bees since he was a child, when he and his great-granddad would take their honey jar to the beehouse in their hometown in Austria to have it filled with golden honey. All the walls were made of beehives and the old beekeeper lived inside with all his equipment, he says. He was always smoking a very fat cigar. I can still smell the smoke, the timber, the forest and the waxy bee and honey smell. I've loved honey ever since, it was always a part of my life. His own beekeeping adventure began about 3 years ago, when he got his first hives and set about learning how to tend them. With climate change, it's on all our minds to do something more about looking after our bees, he says. So I thought, well, why not bring them into the village? He says his idea to introduce a beehive at Charles Upham was warmly welcomed by the Ryman management team. They were just as excited as I was, he says. The hive was nicely painted with landscape scenes by one of the village gardeners, and set up in an empty area of the garden. Marko says the residents have been very supportive too, with some lending a hand with decanting the honey into jars, which are sold at the village cafe. The residents are really embracing it, he says. The whole thing could be done in any village, it just needs a handful of people who are keen on doing it. Marko has been part of the Ryman family since the Charles Upham village opened in 2016. Originally employed as a chef in the village cafe, a year ago he followed his passion and transferred to the garden team, where his job involves regular health checks on his little flying friends. He says there is a lot to learn about caring for bees, and recommends any aspiring beekeepers join their local bee club. You can learn beekeeping over a season, but it takes 5 to 10 years to become a beekeeper. There is so much joy in having bees, so keep it. The former chef appreciates the important role bees play in our ecosystem, with most of the fruit and vegetables that we eat dependent upon bees for pollination. I'm trying to get people more aware of bees. It's really important to bring them back, not just for the sake of the bees but because we need them to sustain proper life. It's just so important that we don't forget about them. And even if you don't have a hive, there are things you can do to support the bees. Marko recommends avoiding chemical insecticides and growing a wide variety of bee-friendly plants. And his most important advice? Smile when you see a bee, he says. No bees, no life. Thanks to the buzzing success of the beehives at Charles Upham, Ryman is looking to install beehives in more of their 38 villages. Ryman continue to focus on sustainability as a business. Initiatives like these help bring them closer to achieving their goals.